The city of Rockville is home to some longtime residents who are more than just our neighbors, but also our heroes. We got the chance to chat with some of Rockville's veterans to hear their stories and experiences during their time of service. Bill Forehand served his country during the Cold War as a member of the U.S. Navy, where he learned to balance military duty and maturity.
My name is Bill Forehand, and I was part of the Navy, and I was a commander in the Navy. But I was in during the Cold War. I was stationed in Guantanamo Bay. Many people refer that as Gitmo, but a lot of the ships went down there then, and I was on a small World War II mine hunter. It looked like a large yacht, and there were just very few, there were maybe 40 sailors and 4 officers, and we were very young and very junior. And so I had to fly to Cuba to get on the ship, landed in Havana, and then took a little plane down to Guantanamo Bay, which is the other end of the island. Well, anyway, I got up the first morning on that ship, and you know, there was a lot of unrest down there. I think Castro had just taken over, and walked out on the fantail, the back end of the ship, and saw somebody murdered right in front of me. It was a Cuban ship back there, and two shipmates got in an argument, and one of them shot the other. So that was my introduction to the Navy. I know in those days, I mean, I learned more about responsibility. I had more responsibility probably in the Navy in the 3 years I was on active duty, and then I was 20 more years in the reserve, than I had in the first 10 years I was working. You grow up in the Navy. So far as veterans are concerned, all of my cousins and older cousins and uncles were in during the Second World War, and one of them was in prison camp in the Pacific, and another one flew a B-29, and they had all kind of wild tales. And so, you know, it's just something we ought to be proud of, the service they've given us, especially in wartime.
Bill Sergi had an accomplished career during war and peacetime, and although he passed away, his widow, Jean Sergi, keeps his legacy alive with his story.
This is a document called Return to the Yorktown by Bill Sergi. I consider myself to be a very lucky man, lucky to have survived several World War II battles and the sinking of the Yorktown at Midway. Lucky that the injuries I received during the Battle of Midway were relatively minor. Lucky to have been awarded 2 Purple Hearts, one of them 10 years after the battle at Kwajalein, and especially lucky to have been chosen to represent my ship's crew on the return trip to locate the sunken Yorktown. I was born in 1924 in New Orleans, the oldest child and only son of a World War I sailor. For as long as I can remember, I was fascinated with airplanes. The picture at the age of 4 shows me in a sailor suit, holding a toy airplane by the wing. Incidentally, the sailor suit was made by my father for his younger brothers while he was serving in World War I. As a youngster, I would pedal my bike several times to the local airport, where I would wash and push airplanes and run errands for pilots, in return for which I would occasionally be treated to a ride in a plane. At 15, with the war in Europe already underway, I tried to run away to Canada and join the Royal Canadian Air Force. My father found out and took me home, but agreed to sign for me to join the U.S. Navy on my 17th birthday. In February 1941, I quit school and enlisted, 10 months before Pearl Harbor. A little more than a year later, in May 1942, at the ripe old age of 18, I found myself aboard the Yorktown, an airplane mechanic in the fighter squadron, VF-42, participating in the Battle of the Coral Sea. This was the first truly carrier battle fought by aircraft alone, in which the fleets never saw each other. In 1969, I founded the Battle of the Coral Sea Association to commemorate that very significant naval engagement. I slid down a rope dangling from the high side of the Yorktown and jumped from its end into the water. Lifeboats were not available since the ship had no power. I found myself in the Pacific with my broken arm resting on my life jacket, which was floating in front of me since I had not cinched it around my waist. I had on a flash suit, my shoes, and my metal helmet. In the water, an officer suggested that I remove the helmet as it might cause me to sink. I thought about that helmet, which had probably saved my life when the torpedo blast pushed me up into the overhead under the catwalk, and about all of my other possessions, which might be going down with the Yorktown into the deep Pacific. And with my one good arm, I carefully removed the helmet and fastened it to my belt, which probably did not reduce my chances of sinking. I still have the helmet and wore it during ceremonies when I returned to Midway in May 1998. I served in most of the Pacific War and stayed on in the Navy for a total of 11 years before resigning in 1952 for personal reasons. In 1973, approaching my 50th birthday, I heard about a reserve program for people in my age bracket, so I re-enlisted, served 10 more years, and retired at the age of 60. I served 21 years over a 43-year span, which included 22 years out of the Navy.
From whichever part of the globe the veterans we spoke with, like Kernan Chasen, now call Rockville home. Mr. Chasen served in the U.S. Air Force, and here is his story.
We've been residents of Rockville since 1985. I moved here right after retiring from the Air Force, where I spent just short of 24 years. Began in 1961. I had drawn a low draft number, and I figured, I better look into some of my options. One of which was the Air Force recruiter who said, I have an opening in this radar field. I said, okay, sounds good to me. Came in, was sent to Keesler Air Force Base down in the Gulf Coast, Biloxi, Mississippi, and received training down there as an electronics technician. Did that for a while, then received my remote tour up into Alaska at Catalina Air Force Station in central Alaska. This is where I can kind of say that for me the Cold War was descriptive. It was a one-year remote tour, but quite an adventure. Things like the bears in the summer would come up right to the camp. Moose would have to, they had an airstrip that where twice a week an aircraft would fly in with supplies. We had to chase the moose off the strip before the aircraft could land. We got snowed in one time for about a week and a half almost. Because the way it was set up, the main site was down at the bottom of the mountain. Had to drive up this road to the top where the radar sites, the radios, and the power and communication sets were. We got a really bad snowstorm. It completely snowed in the road. We were stuck. And also at the time, we had a USO troop had come in, and a couple of the people came up to the hilltop just to entertain the troops up there, and they were stuck with us. So we managed to get through that period of time successfully. But it's amazing how many ways that little cook we had up there could fix fish sticks and beans.
And while veterans' service contributed greatly to our country, being in the military had a significant impact on their own lives as well. Here's how being in the military affected the life of Murray Ravitch.
Discipline, structure, motivation, and how to organize my socks in the drawer, which you did it, or you did it again and again and again until you got it right. These are just small things that are attributed to the structure in the military. There are reasons for this type of thing. It teaches you to stand on your own 2 feet, really. Assume responsibility, and own up to any shortcomings or things like that. And I'm sure you've heard this before, you become pretty much of a family. I mean, you live and eat and sleep with the people, they are your family. You learned how to function on your own, and in other words, it was extremely maturing for people who really needed maturing, and you felt extremely patriotic, and that you were really contributing something to the country and to the country's welfare.
Pre-World War II, women in the military were found mostly in clerical positions. In the case of Joan Fox, she wanted to contribute to the war effort in an official capacity in the military.
The base I was on was a boot camp and also taught gunnery, I believe. And across the road from our base was a naval air station. And it just so happened that they were training French pilots. And General de Gaulle's son was stationed there for a while. We could see him because he was tall like his father. Anyway, we got invited to the events that happened on the Naval Air Station. And just by luck, I was invited to go fly in a Navy trainer called a steerman. And it was quite an experience. He strapped a parachute on, and this young pilot, he was an instructor. He did what they call a loop-the-loop and a slow roll, and then they do something they call a lit, which is when they go down on an aircraft carrier and then up again. Anyway, I got quite a ride, and I doubt that the American pilots would have been allowed to take a wave. But anyway, this fellow took the liberty. So I enjoyed that experience very much. I guess for women, there was I believe it was the Army that employed the nurses and in different positions like that. In fact, that's the reason what stemmed me to join the service was that they were scented, all the exotic parts of the world. That appealed to me. Anyway, I never have regretted. I'm very proud.
Pete Santi is well known in Rockville as having a big voice and personality, and he was no different during his time during the military.
I was one of those people who was assigned to nobody. I was what the Army calls a MOS, which is a military order of service. I was on the second wave in the invasion of Guadalcanal. And since I was a signalman, I was assigned the fact that I had to hang wire. Hang wire means you have to go up the tree and make sure that the wire is up off the ground, because at that time, that original wire was not waterproof. You couldn't just throw it on the ground and run with it. And they started to outfit me with the belt and the hooks and everything else like that. And then they handed me a metal iron frying pan. And I said, well, I'm not going to be a cook here, am I? And they said, no, 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 that's your armor. When you go up 15, 20 feet up in the air, the snipers can get you quicker than anything. And so you always carried this frying pan with you. You either put it on the top of your helmet, or you held it like this while you were working, or some of them hung it from the tree. And you never saw a guy my size, I was 6'4" at the time, about 150 pounds, come down a tree so fast when you heard that zing go by. The next trip that I took was the invasion of Leyte in the Philippines. While I was there, I received a package from my mother, and we couldn't figure out what it was. It's a great big package, about this big, about that high. We opened it up, and she had mailed about 3 months before an apple pie. And we got, the guys in my company we opened up this apple pie, and it was absolutely perfect, because my mother had taken at least 3 or 4 pounds of oatmeal and used it as insulation for that. But the real interesting part about it was we enjoyed the pie very much, and I was going to throw away all of this oatmeal. And I got more complaints about that because they said, no, we're going to eat it, it's food.
Mr. James Wilson came to City Hall to tell his story about his time in the service, serving in the Navy during World War II.
I just graduated from high school, entered Purdue, and that was in 1941. That was the year of Pearl Harbor. And I was registered with the draft board, so I had to make a choice. Either I get drafted or enter the Navy. So I was an engineering officer, but I was assigned to communications. So I enciphered and deciphered coded messages. And we had a machine that the Japanese could never break. You did your service for the country. You worked for Uncle Sam for a while. And you can come home with pride at what you did. And it's a way of maturing men.
Known during her time in the military as Little Bit, Betty Lloyd served during a time when women weren't known to be drill sergeants. She still stays in touch with the friends she made during her time in the U.S. Army.
First time around, I went through my basic training, and they sent me to what they, at that time, they called they called it cadre school, but it was leadership school. So I went through the training and ended up coming back to the post where the basic training was, and I became today they'd call them drill sergeant. I was a platoon sergeant, and I was 20 years old, and I had anywhere from 30 to 40 women in my platoon, and some of them were 50 years old. And I had to teach them how to make a bed where the quarter would bounce off the bed and shine their shoes, spit shine them, and how to salute. And I taught different subjects in basic training. My favorite subject was military customs and courtesies. And a lot of people don't know about the salute, the history of the salute. It comes from the old days with the knights when they raised their shield. And that's where you get the salute.
Deployed to Iraq in 2003, Stacy Sullivan is still an active member of the Navy, following in her family's footsteps of serving her country. Sullivan is the second vice commander of the local American Legion Post 86 and took the time to share her story with us.
I was actually deployed to Iraq in 2003. I deployed on the USNS Comfort, and by rate, I'm a hospital corpsman, but during the deployment I actually worked in security. So it was a very, not something that we normally would do. So as we got underway and when we arrived off the coast of Iraq, our duties became guarding prisoners of war, Iraqi prisoners of war. So that was very, very interesting. I was deployed for almost 7 months. I'm a single parent, so at the time I left my 10-year-old son here in Rockville to go on deployment, and I was very, very fortunate with this support and the network of families that I had here to take care of him while I was deployed. But very, very interesting. I'm a better person for deploying. I learned so much while we were over there. And it just makes me very, very thankful for the freedoms that we have here in the States, because they don't have them there. When I was stationed at the Pentagon, I was in uniform on the Metro, and a very young college man, he was probably in his 20s, sat next to me, and we carried on a little bit of a conversation, and when he went to leave the train, he shook my hand and said, "Thank you." And I don't think people realize how important that is, because we're just doing our job. We don't have to necessarily agree with the war or agree with the reasons behind the war, but that's our job. And so when you see a veteran, whether they're from World War II, Vietnam, today, 10 years from now, a thank you means more than anything you could possibly send them. The care packages, just a thank you. That's all they expect. They expect nothing more, because they're out there every day protecting your freedoms. Thank you goes a mile.
These are the stories of Rockville's heroes. The city salutes Rockville's veterans, and to veterans everywhere, we say thank you.